Okay. So good news, bad news, things I want to share with you. If you're both trying to start a stream and you're a science nerd like me to some degree. So my background is both, besides carpentry, it's automotive mechanical technician, um, electronic and PVC assembly. It was mechanical engineering technology. It's now technically classified as electrical mechanical engineering technology, which is a technologist level. I have communications tech, and as well a little bit of shop class from high school as well. I was a huge nerd when it came to data rates and transfers for computer science and as well for communication tech because I was interested in how things capture or record data as we go throughout the last decade, and specifically the decade or the 2 decades before that when we go back to the 70s. So, this is for the nerds who want to know how to really run a stream at a professional level. So, there's an equation online. And it comes down to kilohertz. Why is kilohertz a very important thing? Well, hertz in general is an important thing. Your computer monitor or TV or any device transmits at hertz a second. Hertz a second. I'm having these, by the way. Hertz a second can come down to 144 hertz, which is what we're using now for 4K, which gives us pretty close to about 144 frames a second. If I translate that into a byte, this is why gigabytes are the hip thing these days, because it translates into both video capture rate and as well streaming rate. So when I talk MP4, I'm limited to 6,000 megabits a second, which is 6 gigabits a second. It's pretty good. USB 3, which surpasses the thing that was hot when I was in high school, specifically at the end of high school, was called Firewire cable, and that has a bit rate of 320 bits a second, back when USB was crunching out 180 to 80 bits a second. USB 3 Super Speed, which my recording device down here, it's a Lenovo P50, supposedly has each port as a unified, as in one single port has its own bandwidth cache of 5,000 megabits a second, which is 5 gigabits a second. I don't believe it. It's the same with my Asus 790 Z TUF motherboard. It says the same thing. I don't believe it because it all comes down to Northbridge consumption at the end of the day. Whether you want to say it does or doesn't, it does. So tonight, me and Sarah, we were looking to record some Monster Hunter stuff. We got some progression, and so that'll make the next video kind of easier for everybody because we've worked out some of the kinks. When I started tonight, we put about 2 hours down. I go and check the file format. It was like 1.64 gigabytes. 2 hours of video. I don't know if you know this or not, but if you're recording an AVI file at 1K or 1080p format, because 4K is just, for 1K screens, 8K is for 4K screens, you're starting to get the idea. For both data flow and pixel size. So when we go back to our 1K format, I'm moving around on the map and I'm trying to solve issues because we're getting a lot of blurriness in the recording but not in the playback. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going on? Well, the playback's fine because the playback on the card, the USB external card, is still able to process. The problem is the software isn't set to keep up with the rate to which the card is processing. Go figure. So by working through problems both on Monster Hunter, because the Vignette and motion blur was actually the thing that led me to this, because when I'd move quickly on the mouse on the screen when I was previously recording, everything would go very blurry very quickly to very sharp in a couple of seconds. And I was thinking to myself, oh no, maybe I'm using too much compression rate, or, maybe I've got bad capture cards, being that the company that produces them is called Pack Oxy 4K. I'm gonna tell you something you need to think about when you're capturing things with a computer. That we'll get to that at the end of the video. So going back to the initial problem, I turned off the motion blur, I turned off the Vignette, I turned off everything, cranked everything up to high on Monster Hunter, and then I went to record using OBS. And what I found was the blurriness actually got worse. If the blurriness is getting worse, that's telling me that it's trying to process more data through a smaller rate of data transfer, or in this case, bandwidth. And that led me to, okay, what's the real problem? So I go and check out the software. It was limited at 1,500 kilobits a second. That's 1.5 megabits a second. Audio from a stereo mic, a professional stereo mic like a Blue Yeti, or an XLR mic. XLR mics are about 180,000 kilohertz. Just keep that in mind when we keep going here. This Blue Yeti is about 48,000 kilohertz. We divide that by 1,000, we're going to get 48 bytes a second. That's how many bytes a second. Not megabytes. Just not megabytes, sorry, bits. That's how many bits a second it's consuming. It's nothing. When we go up to the gigabit section, that's 0.048. I actually think it's 0.048, but I've done the math, and the math said 0.048. Because if I'm talking a single giga, yeah, that makes sense. Because if I'm talking a 100th, it's going to be at the next decimal, and then 1,000, which is a gigabit, is going to be in the decimal of 1. Okay. Conversions and silliness out of the way by the 10th of a decimal. So I'm looking at the consumption of both the microphone and each capture card going into the Lenovo, because there are two 4K USB capture cards. One is for my camera, one is for the monitor. And I'll switch over to live so you can kind of see the picture now that I'm trying to say. So you have audio, two video sources being captured in your computer. USB 3, or USB 3 Super Speed, which is every USB connection I now have for all of my recording and data transfers on any of my computers, is 5,000 megabits a second. That's 5 gigabits a second. Total bandwidth for your entire system. They say individual port. I don't believe it, like I said. So it's 5,000 total. You have HD format at 60 hertz. Keep that in mind. 60 hertz a second. So they say each graphics card or each source of video at 1K 1080p consumes about 15 megabits a second. Keep in mind we have 5,000 available. So when you're recording video, just like you're defragging memory in a computer, just like you're capturing data to a hard drive, you get fragmented sections. And that's when the computer is trying to juggle too many tasks, so it skips frames. You want to allocate memory to cover that so that it can get smooth, clean video feeds. I believe always in doubling my source right out of the gate. So if I have 15,000, yes, 15,000 kilohertz, or one 15 megabits a second, I want to make that double. Double because I am recording. I'm recording a single source, and that single source needs extra memory or extra source behind it to buffer and capture a flawless video without any issue whatsoever. If I'm recording two devices, which is, think of it as in two 1080p screens, I want to capture that at double the rate per screen. So now I want to capture at 60,000 kilobits a second, or 60 megabits a second. Keep in mind, we have 5,000 available. If I do the conversion on the mic, it works out to be 48 bytes. If you put 48 bytes on top of 60,000, you're consuming a little bit more than 60,000 kilobytes, or 60 megabits per second. Each frame, or each source, they say, especially at MP4 quality, consumes 60,000 kilobits a second. That's the rate at which it records. But that's not at the rate it's capturing per second, because it needs to be able to use that 60,000 to get that coverage of 15,000. If you do the math, 6 times 3 is actually 6, 12, 18. So there's 30,000 extra allocated, because they even say we need this much cache to make sure that your screen on your computer for displaying video is flawless. So right there you have their math, but now you need to capture that flawlessly. So take 15, times it by 2, so now you have double the capture rate, because you have to both provide and capture. See what I'm saying now? At kilobit rate. You also need to have a buffer for that capture rate, and that comes in the source of a single frame a second, which is 60 hertz. But 60 hertz at 1080p goes and expands up larger, and what they've worked out that formula to be is 6,000 kilobits a second. Okay, now you're with me. Now you've caught up to where I am and doing the math to make sure I've got this right in the recording. So I'm going to start Monster Hunter. And we're just going to go ahead and pick our character. We'll just create our own little session. And we'll click finish and we'll go and we'll do that. All that in the recording is going to be flawless, because it's all menu screens and it's all just real-time capture.
Targets are
and it's coming from a second computer. Keep that in mind. I'm not recording from the same computer with that byte. I'm now recording from a different computer that's using all of my USB information on 2 different computers to capture. This is a really good idea because A, it stops DDoSing. If somebody wanted to DDoS you in game, it's not going to stop your stream. If somebody wants to DDoS your stream, it's not going to stop your game. And then you can put VPNs and other things behind that to protect it. Trust me, it's just a good idea to separate the two of them at the core. The next thing is consumption of bandwidth to run your keyboard, your mouse, anything else that's USB like your audio these days. Things like that. It all adds up into the consumption of that 5,000 megabits a second. The goal is we want to use hopefully less than 10%. That's not the case because video is very demanding. You end up actually using about 15% of that bandwidth. I don't even want that on my gaming computer. I put that on my recording computer and just let it handle that load. Now I've got 2 sources 5,000 megabits a second. One to broadcast and create the video, see where I'm going, and the other to capture it at double the rate, because it has to both receive it and then pass through to a monitoring TV outside of that, so that we can get audio and other things like that. And there's also audio in that information, which, again, more bandwidth. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm just doubling it, because having twice the amount of coverage is just a good thing to do. Adding an extra frame on top of that, it gives you the coverage so that it can not only buffer, but render at real time. So I'll show you. I did an MP4 video. It is locked at 6,000 mega, no, that's wrong. 6,000 kilobits a second. 5,000, I have 5,000 megabits available. It's locked at 6 megabits a second. So it can't go higher and it can't go lower, because that's how the code is written for that codec. If I use an AVI codec, it can literally record whatever I want at any speed at any given time. That's how AVI is. The problem is the megabits it generates, because its native codec is so demanding, is ridiculous. If I switch to NVIDIA's N265 codec, it's the greatest thing ever. I've used it to use a webcam to record a video at just absolutely flawless video, and I was really impressed with just how a cheap webcam was able to capture an entire desk of me assembling something for a company. It was incredible. Just in that regard. But now I'm using software, and that software needs to take in multiple video sources, calculate it, process it, do stuff like that. I want to give it a little bit extra. So I've done the math. The best way to capture a stream at any video source, keep in mind one extra, so just keep a +1 of your screen's resolution at max. So if I'm capturing 1080p, that's 6,000. If I'm capturing a 4K, that's 30,000 kilobytes a second. Starting to get the drift, how quickly it shoots up. So now we go to understanding why that matters. And it starts right here. So you'll see my recording yesterday, it gets very blurry, but if I'm running around here, you're going to get a lot of fluid motion in the cape. You're going to get no digitization whatsoever on the screen, and you're going to get almost a perfect rendering of the notch in the cape. That is the key point, because it's where two sets of multiple collaborative pipelines in 3D rendering meet. And that's very important, because it's both fluent and moving, but it's defined as a shape. Why that matters in 3D modeling, and as well as capturing video, it has to capture that clarity seamlessly. We're going to end up seeing an almost one-to-one rate. There's going to be latency, there's going to be a little bit of loss at the end of the day. You'll never avoid it, but it will be almost perfect. If I wanted to double a 4K image, I'm looking at 60 plus 60. Now I'm at 120. Yes, I'm at 120 megabits a second. I'm nowhere even touching the 5,000 limit. Streamers are able to use things like Elgato cards, which cost like $400 a piece, and they go, oh, it's a great performing card, I haven't had any issues, the compression's great, everything's super clear. Let me just go back to close up here, now that we've done that test. But at $400 for a USB capture card, that's locked inherently to 5,000 megabits a second. You're going to buy a Chinese card that says, oh, we can't guarantee that. But let me explain why they can't guarantee that. They can't guarantee that because they probably copied somebody else's design, and they know your computer is going to have other things that consume that bandwidth overall. Now, if I'm trying to buy a cheap capture card, my market's going to be people who don't understand that concept. Maybe there are people even gaming on a Windows XP machine, on a USB 1 serial port. And they plug that in, they go, oh, I'm getting bandwidth, but I'm not getting the quality I expected. Well, that's because you're not getting the bandwidth to support the card. And that's part of the thing. So if I buy a $400 Elgato and plug it into, a brand new system with 5,000 megabits available of bandwidth, of course it's not going to fail. It has memory on it to help process and render that before it ships it off to the computer, and then has that bandwidth even in the computer to help narratively compress it. Whereas the cheap card is literally depending on the computer to process it. But it works because it's already working underneath that bandwidth cap that's available. So you do the math. You can buy a 4K $40 card, which is well under the $5,000 megabit limit and is not going to be affected. And so long as you're capturing on a proprietary computer that's designed to write and capture video, does it really matter if you spend $400? Which, keep in mind, $40 to $400, there's a $360 difference. Now, you can buy that Elgato card and plug it into your computer, and yeah, it's probably not going to be so resource demanding, but is it going to do the same job? Yeah, it is. Because everything's locked not just to the bandwidth that's available, but also the capturing bandwidth of the device itself. And we can determine that. So if a 4K device and a 4K device both require about 30 megabits a second, that's not even that's not even 50% of 5,000 megabits a second. They're both going to work just fine without any issue, without any conflict. Proof of that is what I have on the screen right now at this moment. And proof that bandwidth matters is evidence to yesterday's collection of information that's being processed and submitted to YouTube. And that's not even I'm not even touching the final part and the final thing I want to talk about in the entire thing. The entire discussion of video bandwidth and why that matters. So we talk professional. I'm trying to go with a professional 1080p capture. Most streamers wish they would have that. Some streamers do have that. If I'm talking professional 4K, the bandwidth spikes. If I'm talking professional 12K, now we're talking a film studio, that bandwidth still matters. How do you think they're doing that? Ask yourself that. They're doing post-production and film editing, so they're taking multiple sources and putting it onto one screen through software. They're not doing a live stream collection of multiple screens and posting it out. Maybe for a sports event, but not for film production. When we talk 12K, we're talking, believe it or not, so 8K is 4K images. 12K is just 2 more 4K images added onto that. Because 16K is 8K images put together, which is also the same compression as 8 4K images being put together. Starting to see the exponential equation, how things just slowly expand and get more and more demanding on pixels, memory, bandwidth, write speed. It all ties back to bandwidth, kilohertz transmission of both signal and frequency throughout your bandwidth, And it also ties back to what your computer is able to process and broadcast onto your screen, and how you are going to collect or gather that information and write it to a hard drive. Which, by the way, the hard drive also writes in frequency too. I don't want to talk about that, but you now get the idea how it all translates into each other. This is the thing with capturing video and sound, is you're always going to need a little extra for sound. You'll never get away from it. You always need a little bit extra for mice. You'll never get away from that. It's all about what kind of content you want to capture and how many different sources you want to capture. If you want a source looking down at your keyboard, one looking at you, and then capturing all three of your screens, you need 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. 18. Okay? 100. Not even 100. 180 megabytes a second. Megabits a second. You're still not near 5,000. Take it for the face value, do the math, and try and work out the problem on your own. And maybe you're a photographer, so you don't really care about learning all that. You're more concerned about lumens of light. Maybe you're a mechanical engineer and you're just trying to get the mechanical capture. Maybe you're an audio engineer and you understand you need kilohertz, but you don't understand about kilobytes. Maybe you're an electrical engineer and you're trying to figure out how a device's volume of transmissible data is recorded onto a hard drive. All of this is interconnected through one principle: engineering. And it's both electrical and mechanical together. That is where my passion has been for both technology, filming, automotive, product development, marketing, sales. You're starting to just get the tip of the iceberg of how much knowledge I know and what I can use to accomplish and apply to get the same quality, or sometimes even better, than professionals. Thanks for watching, everyone.